Hello, and welcome to the Geopolitics Explained podcast. In recent weeks, I've been discussing Greenland and the game theory behind Donald Trump's recent moves. Today, I'm going to attempt to back up these previous posts by discussing some frameworks that support how and why our geopolitical world can shift from one of positive sum interactions to one of negative sum interactions. To begin this pursuit, we are going to look towards history, and we're going to discuss the decline of previous empires. Now, if you head over to Substack, the link for Substack will be included in the description of this episode. You will find the post that lines up with what we're discussing in this episode today. Over on that post, there is an image included that details the last 16 challenges between a ruling geopolitical superpower and a rising geopolitical superpower. Of these 16 occurrences, 12 have resulted in war, but since the end of World War II, we have had 3 occurrences of challenges from a rising geopolitical superpower towards a ruling geopolitical superpower, and none of these have resulted in war. It is worth noting that these challenges can refer to global superpowers or regional superpowers. So, in today's world of rising geopolitical tension, it's these occurrences where no war occurred that I'm interested in. More importantly, I'm interested in why war didn't occur. Of the 3 occurrences since the end of World War II, I will discuss 2 of them in greater detail. The first being the United States versus the Soviet Union during the Cold War. The United States emerged as a global superpower in the aftermath of World War II, in part because it was self-sufficient enough to weather any storms from the war, but also because the United States wasn't involved in any negative sum games, as many countries, especially those in Europe, were. In fact, due to Lend-Lease, the United States were actually on the positive side of many zero-sum interactions. But in the aftermath of World War II, the Soviet Union soon challenged the United States. It's questionable if nuclear deterrence worked, or if the 2 superpowers did fight via secretive hybrid methods of war, such as proxy war. This is why it's difficult to determine if this truly was warfare between a rising and a ruling geopolitical power or not. But despite this, no all-out war erupted between the Soviet Union and the United States, and so this is classed as no war between a ruling and a rising geopolitical superpower. The second occurrence that I want to discuss in more detail is isolated to Europe. After the Cold War, some expected that Germany would rise once again in Europe. However, this narrative has been relatively quiet in geopolitics. This is related to the success of the European project in collectively getting European nations on the same page. But the long-term success of the project is still questionable. If nations at the top of the European Union, such as France and Germany, are hurt more than they are helped by the collective European Union, I question, would they remain within the group? Now, this is an extreme scenario, but this is the exact pursuit that Trump is currently undertaking with the rest of the world. He sees the United States on the negative side of many zero-sum games, and he wants to flip these relationships. In Europe, would the strongest nations be incentivized to remain on the negative side of zero-sum games, or would they seek change? Despite the potential for some future tensions here, Europe today does remain cohesive, and no war has unfolded. The details between the ruling and rising geopolitical powers is known as Thucydides' trap, which is the claim that war is inevitable between a ruling power and a rising power. It's worth noting that the inevitability of such conflicts was noted as hyperbole, but still, the tension between ruling and rising geopolitical powers is clear, especially in our world today. This discussion on game theory that we've undertaken in the last few weeks is supplementary to the discussion on Thucydides' trap. In general, if geopolitical rivals are playing positive-sum games, they can both achieve positive payoffs. Naturally, if both are growing during less chaotic times, then naturally there is less to fight about anyway. But if geopolitical rivals are playing zero-sum games, the positive payoff for one power is equal to the negative payoff for another. As we've discussed before, the nation with the negative payoff can either accept its decline or they can fight to reverse it. This is currently where the United States finds itself today in relation to China. But if one nation fights too hard during this zero-sum interaction, then they can escalate into a negative-sum interaction. This sees both powers losing, and they fight for the relatively small scraps that remain. Due to this process, I'd argue that the ruling geopolitical superpowers should be incentivized to maintain positive-sum games with other geopolitical powers, unless the growth of rising powers outweighs the growth of the ruling powers. Ground this in reality, for the United States and China, China is rising at a much faster pace today. The United States is also in relative decline in many areas. In this world, the United States is incentivized to pursue aggression, to leverage its strengths, and to reverse its decline. As a result, we remain on this path that we are currently being taken down, and this is why tensions over Greenland, Cuba, and Iran will remain. But has the United States started this pursuit too late? Have they sleepwalked into this decline relative to China? The United States does possess economic and military strength, but will this fade over time as China rises? To frame these questions, I'm going to introduce another concept that is known as the fourth turning. The fourth turning is a vital part of the Strauss-Howe generational theory. The theory is strongly connected to a statement that many of us will have heard before. This is that strong leaders create good times, which in turn creates weak leaders, and then weak leaders create bad times, which in turn creates strong leaders. And this cycle repeats. In fact, the fourth turning includes 4 stages that are named the following. The first stage is the high. This is a period where we see strong leaders and good times. Institutions are strong and individualism is weak. Society is confident about its collective direction during these periods. Over time, we then transition towards the awakening. This is the period in which good times create weak leaders. Institutions are attacked during this period in the name of greater individualism. Society is less confident about its collective direction, and it begins to fragment. After this, we have the unravelling. The unravelling is when weak leaders create bad times. During this period, institutions are weak and individualism is strong. Society is heavily fragmented. After the unravelling comes the crisis. This is the bad times that ultimately create strong leaders. But the crisis is the storm before the new strong leaders emerge. This is an era of destruction where institutions are destroyed and rebuilt in response to a nation's survival. Now, this cycle lasts around 85 years, or close to a full human life. As a result of this, generations also massively drive this cycle. As each generation ages and crosses from one stage of the cycle into another, the behaviour and mood change. Strauss and Howe break these generational changes down into 4 different archetypes. The first archetype to break down these generations is the prophets. These are the generations that enter childhood during a high. The baby boomers, who are born from 1943 to 1960, are described as the prophet archetype. The next archetype is the nomad. These generations enter childhood during an awakening. Generation X, which is born between 1961 and 1981, are described as nomads. The third archetype is the hero archetype. These generations enter childhood during a unraveling. The millennials, born between 1982 and around 2005, are described as the hero archetype. And finally, we have artists. These generations enter childhood during a crisis. The generation born after 2005 and up to today are described as the artist archetype. Prophets are born during the high, and so they experience awakening as young adults. During this period, institutions are attacked in the name of greater individualism. Also, heroes are born during a unraveling, and so they experience the crisis as young adults. During this period, as we discussed earlier, institutional life is destroyed and rebuilt. In the fourth turning cycle, it's these stages that are seen as the most formative. If we were to refer to the cycle, including strong leaders and good times, and weak leaders and bad times, prophets and heroes will typically be seen as the strong leaders because they go through these formative stages. On the flip side, nomads are born during the awakening, and they reach the unraveling period as young adults. This is where institutions are weak but are not yet collapsing, and individualism is rising but hasn't reached a peak yet. Artists are born during the crisis and so experience the high as young adults. During this period, institutions are strong and individualism is weak. These are seen as the best of times. Again, referring to the earlier analogy, typically, nomads and artists are seen as the weak leaders. If we look at the world today, it's clear that we are in a crisis. This has been marked by key events such as the Great Recession, COVID-19, the Russia-Ukraine war, and conflict in the Middle East, among many other issues that we discuss here at Geopolitics Explained. The worry is that we remain in a state of escalation, and it's difficult to determine where this period of crisis could end. Because of the aspects of game theory and the potential to escalate into zero-sum and negative-sum games, this period of crisis is naturally contributing to fights for geopolitical influence. With the decline of empires, Thucydides' trap, and the fourth turning acting as potential supporting pieces of evidence for this decline, I now question if we will remain in this environment of zero-sum interactions for some time, or if we can attempt to tackle this. It's this pursuit that we'll discuss in next episode. That's all for today. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a review on the podcast platform of your choice. I've been Dylan, and I'll talk to you next time.